Before I learned how to draw anything or most things from imagination, I developed a very keen sense for space and its depth. So for you who's watching, I believe it is important to start off with the fundamentals of perspective so that you can develop a stronger foundation for your drawings and future projects. And to start off, I'm going to show you 5 different types of linear perspective that depict space and depth in various different ways. We can begin with one-point perspective by drawing a horizon line and putting down a single dot in the center of it, drawing out grid lines like so that emanate from this single vanishing point, which is what it's called technically, and here we get ourselves a ground plane. Now, why would we want to have that? Using these guidelines, you can essentially determine how a geometric object and its base can vanish into space further away from you. And so we can raise up some vertices, cap it off at a certain point, and then proceed to extrude this plane that we're looking at in the frontal view further away from us, giving us a cube. And you can see it's a very simple way of depicting a simple geometric object. This single point perspective also is quite limited in the sense that everything that we look at in this particular structure is only frontal. And due to the single point, any other geometric object that we draw is going to recede in a similar kind of fashion. And the further we get away from this center point, either on the left side or on the right side, the more skewed and warped this perspective becomes. So again, there is another limitation to it as well. You can only work within a set sort of window or a particular working area. And I'm giving you a couple of examples here. Also, you can draw any silhouette, like an arch, for instance, which I'm trying to attempt to draw here, and extrude it further down and into and towards this single vanishing point, making a tall and standing archway. And if I were to extend, or rather extrude this silhouette further towards the vanishing point, I would get a tunnel. And so you get the idea. And also, while I'm doing this, you can pause this video at any time and draw from reference, or you can try and drawing your own geometric shapes and different kinds of volumes within this type of perspective. Now, as I go further, I'm going to show you a 2-point perspective, and just like the name suggests, now we have 2 more vanishing points, and this kind of perspective, you'll see, it gives me the ability to see geometric objects from its corner side, as opposed to the 1-point perspective where we see objects only frontally. And as I'm about to raise these vertices, I kind of want to stop and give an example of how you can cap off a geometric object and show its top side. Essentially, you have to stop before crossing the horizon line. Otherwise, if you go further and raise the vertices above the horizon line and cap off with the same sort of guides coming from these vanishing points, you will get a view of a tall geometric object in such a way that you no longer can see the top side. So imagine this being a building or a very tall marble block. But let's say you want to turn this block and get a different view. Well, now you have to shift the 2 vanishing points, and as you can see, I'm bringing the left vanishing point closer and the right one far, far away in such a way that you kind of have to intuit how the vanishing point guides are going to behave in relation to the left vanishing point. It's an intuitive part unless you're going to get a very, very long piece of paper. And again, in this particular view, don't shy away from building any sort of silhouette and extruding that silhouette towards any of the vanishing points. Here, you're going to have to keep in mind the both sides of this vanishing point guidelines to make sure that you keep your geometric objects and the collage that you are going to build in line with the rules of this particular linear perspective. So for instance, you can build a base, you can build a small little pyramid atop of that base, you can add or subtract different kinds of shapes and forms, and try not to go too complex with geometric shapes as you start off. Keep it simple and keep it as clear and as precise as you can. This part of the lesson is mostly focused on precision so that you understand how these rules are applied and how you can manage to draw a convincing view of a particular geometric composition. And now I can move on to 3-point perspective, and you guessed it, I'm adding another vanishing point, but in this particular case, you have a choice. You can add a third vanishing point below the horizon line or above it. Now let me draw out the grid lines as usual so that we can get a ground plane, and if I extrude the guidelines from the third bottom vanishing point, we are able to get a top view that is exaggerated in such a way that now the geometric cube is vanishing not only into two distances that are in line with the horizon, but also downwards, giving us a little bit of a more dramatic kind of a view. So if I add another point upwards in the similar fashion, draw additional guidelines from the two vanishing points on the horizon, now I get a dramatic view from underneath a particular geometric object. And this is sort of a view that is akin to how a human being might be looking up to a very tall skyscraper, and how that skyscraper's shape might be receding into not only the distance towards the horizon, but also above into the sky. Now I keep bringing up buildings and these different views. Well, this kind of type of perspective is very effective for illustrating cityscapes and landscapes with a lot of monoliths or architectural structures. And you can see I'm giving you an example of me populating this particular top view of this sort of perspective with a vanishing point below the horizon to demonstrate how just by plopping down one or two or more cubes here and there, different kinds of rectangles of different kinds of shapes, rectangles on top of rectangles, all of a sudden this starts to become a lot more reminiscent of a cityscape. But there is a significant limitation to this particular view. Despite the fact that now we have 3 vanishing points on the horizon and below, if we try and extend this cube beyond the horizon line, the perspective starts to warp in such a way that it no longer connects to the world above us. As you can tell, the cube, or the rectangular cube rather, behind this frontal one is now completely gone, and they do not connect with one another, which is not a true way that we perceive reality and space with our eyes. But that can be corrected with this next particular kind of perspective, which is a 4-point perspective. So again, we have a horizon with 2 points atop of it, and now 2 more that are forming a vertical line that is perpendicular to our horizon line. And now we can not only draw out guidelines from the 2 vanishing points on the horizon line, but these bendy guidelines from the top and bottom lines, forming us this sort of a circular grid work. And now, the way we extend the vertices is going to align with these bendy sort of guidelines coming from the top and below, connecting with one another and creating a warped perspective view, allowing you to draw geometric shapes in such a manner that they now not only vanish into 2 directions with these 2 vanishing points located on the horizon line, but the 2 points that are located above and below the horizon line. So, like with this arch, now you can see how it organically sort of emerges from the ground, rises upwards, and then slowly and gradually bends towards the ultimate vanishing point of the sky above us. So again, these guidelines, bendy ones, are just to help you match whatever sort of geometric shape you would like to illustrate within this particular type of view. I would urge you to practice as much as you can by being as clear as you can and as meticulous as you can using these guidelines so that you can develop a very keen sense of how you can use these particular rules of perspective to draw out a very interesting and dramatic scene. Now, this is all well and good. We are getting closer to how we are actually able to perceive reality, but there's a small caveat. Now, these points are fixed, and we can't really move them around unless we introduce a 5-point perspective. Now I'm going to repeat the same type of grid work similar to how I made 4-point perspective grid lines, but with the addition of the 5th point emanating these guidelines from the center, adding an additional sense of depth to the space with the horizon lines now connecting also with the bendy lines, same as the top and bottom points. Now, this is the closest that we can get to actually how we perceive reality around us with our eyes. Some call it the fisheye perspective because of how exaggerated the perspective is, and that is true. You can see now, unlike in the 4-point perspective where we have these guidelines infinitely extending, now here in the 5-point perspective, the archway, if I draw it, its entire length is extending and shrinking away from left to right, similarly how you would see this tall structure shrinking away from bottom to top, allowing for multi-directional proportional sort of warping. And when I'm saying that this is how we are actually perceiving our world, what I mean by that is our eyes are at all times viewing this sort of a peripheral vision, but we are only able to focus on a single dot, closely reminiscent to how this single point in the center is the main focal point of our focus. Now, as a quick example, I also want to show you how, if I draw a cube, what ways we can make sure that we can shift this cube around. And it's by, again, shifting the two horizon dots. And now we are also intuiting the way of bending these lines in accordance to how far or how close these points are to the center point. Now, the further we are away, the more towards the infinity to the left. In this particular case, we extend our guidelines that are shrinking away in a very gradual manner as opposed to the vanishing point that we have close to the center point. Now, the last example that I want to show you is how you can shift your viewing angle by turning either to the left or right within 5-point perspective. Now, I'm going to draw the same sort of module and imagine this is a lens through which I'm looking at the world, and I'm repeating the same bendy guidelines with the same center dot, but I'm going to shift and add another grid work with the same kind of circular structure, with the same sort of bendy lines bending from the left vanishing point to the right vanishing point, from top to bottom. And now I'm also going to extend past of the right vanishing point to create an additional grid work. And from this second grid, I am essentially drawing out a corner plane of, let's say, a neighborhood house. And you can imagine with this kind of view, you are essentially free to capture the maximum amount of your surroundings. Well, actually almost the maximum amount, the 360 degrees of your entire surroundings. And again, this is just an example to show you how powerful these kinds of rules and methods can be in terms of depicting the reality of our surroundings. These 5 types of linear perspective are ways to represent space and different kinds of volumes and objects within those spaces. In the first example, it is the most simplistic way to depict depth and how simple geometric objects can be placed by only facing us, the viewer, in the most flat frontal manner, and have them recede into a single vanishing point. Here are some examples of prominent artists of the past using this method, but you can see how limiting this is. So naturally, artists developed this method further by adding one more vanishing point to turn the corner and shift the viewing angle. But again, this was not enough. Seeing how parallel the verticality of geometric objects are, they went and added one more vanishing point for our own choosing, to have it depict how objects recede from us in more than 2 directions along the horizon line, depending if we look from above or below certain objects. And finally, the 4 and 5-point perspective were developed to encapsulate our entire field of vision. And in my opinion, M.C. Escher was a master at not only utilizing these techniques and creating wonderful works of art, but he was able to go a step further and bend the rules of these methods, which is the whole purpose of learning all of this, is for you, the artist, to set yourself on a path towards ultimate freedom of expression, which is knowing all of the necessary rules and how to break them in the most striking way possible. And that's it for this particular lesson.